Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where I look exclusively at 3D Blu-rays, not to do a movie review, but to focus almost entirely on the film's 3D with just a short word at the end about the film itself. And this time I'm looking at Darren Aronofsky's 2014 film Noah. This has an aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1 and it was post-converted into 3D. Not only that, but I believe this one was one of those very late in the production decisions to create a 3D version, and the work was done in a much shorter time frame than usual. And they've managed to do a pretty good job on this one. I always like a good piece of 3D in a film's opening shot, and this one has a nice star field which has some clearly visible depth to it. And then, even better than that, we get a view of the Earth which is very noticeably spherical, so it's a nice bit of hyperstereo. It's also very clearly not the Earth as we know it today, but the single pre-Triassic supercontinent of Pangaea, which I think means that the events here take place a couple of 100 million years ago. So the film does stray maybe just a little bit from historical accuracy, and it's also more than happy to embellish its Old Testament source material in some fairly extreme ways. By way of example, one of the things they might not have talked about too much in Sunday school was the giant rock creatures who helped old Noah to build his ark. I'm really glad that Aronofsky brought these big guys into the story though, primarily because they look great in 3D. In these shots, they're an excellent example of how 3D can make sense of a view. In 2D here, you can barely understand their form. Obviously in motion they make more sense, but in 3D they totally come to life, with their shape being so much clearer than is possible in 2D. I think this effect is partly due to the fact that, unlike a human for example, our brains aren't too familiar with how a giant rock monster looks, how its body is shaped, so the 2D cues aren't enough for us to piece it together. And so it's a perfect example of how 3D can fill in missing detail and make sense of what we're seeing. I say make sense of what we're seeing, but I think that for some Bible scholars it might have taken a bit more than a pair of 3D goggles to make sense of a lot of what's up on the screen in this film. It's not just the fantasy and madness that the 3D benefits though. Regular faces are given some volume, maybe not as much as you've sometimes seen in 3D films, but they're certainly not flat, and these are mostly faces full of character, faces with texture, and the 3D gives them a solidity and form, so it's good to see that these have all been given some 3D attention. The 3D does slip up here and there, and one or two conversion errors are difficult not to notice, like the warping on the rocky hill in the foreground here, and in this close-up the flames are pulling the twigs, or whatever it is burning, into the wrong space. I know this doesn't really matter at all, and no one goes looking for it, but it's just in the nature of the way our brains work that when something looks wrong in 3D space it can be very jarring. The worst of them was probably the smearing of the leaves in the trees here. It's really quite a horrible mess, and it might be the kind of thing that a vengeful god might want to smite the conversion team for. Pleasingly though, there are other times when the conversion does a great job with the vegetation, which is always a bit of a tricky thing to convert into 3D. So when the camera's not moving, it's a lot less difficult, and the plants and trees here look very nice in 3D. There's also a really good bit of 3D when we're looking up and see some leaves falling towards the camera, and this shot is another one of those that demonstrates the power of 3D over 2D, because you might not even notice a single falling leaf here in 2D, but if you were to see this same static shot in 3D, you would immediately notice loads of them. On a smaller scale, the plant that Anthony Hopkins is scrabbling around in here look lovely and solid. On an even smaller scale, the flower here has its own distinct little volume, and what I think is good about the 3D here is that this is a significant moment in the story, and these are the times where I think that good 3D is a genuine aid to the storytelling, so it's subtle and minor, but I like this little view. There are quite a few compositions that lend themselves well to 3D, like the tree stumps here, and this view is one where if it had been shot with 3D in mind, I'd have probably knowingly mentioned it was obviously framed to look good in 3D. So great stereo composition, albeit presumably entirely accidental. There's quite a bit of scaffolding during the building of the big boat, and scaffolding ought to look good in 3D, which this stuff does, and lots of the ark's interiors. It's such a great structure for 3D, and there are several shots of various animals making their way on board, often with the camera pulling back, and these are all not only amongst the film's special effects money shots, but also they're the 3D money shots, full of detail in the separation and depth. There are some nice moments under the water where bubbles bubble, all spread across the z-axis, always allowing for a nice 3D effect, and in Visions of the Flood there are loads of creatures whose demise is quite haunting, and all the more so as it's a strong and solid piece of 3D. There are times where perhaps certain elements aren't placed into any interesting 3D space, and I think that's always as a result of the way the film was shot rather than the failure of any efforts to wrangle it into 3D, as I'm pretty sure there wasn't any consideration given to making this in 3D at the time it was filmed, so things like these flaming streaks coming towards us aren't given any relevant 3D treatment, which I expect they would have been had the shot been conceived to be seen in 3D. In what must be an entirely accidental piece of weak 3D preceding great 3D, there's this flock of birds which, when we initially see them, they've barely got any three-dimensional quality to them, but then we see them spiralling around Noah in what's one of the best images and most striking bits of excellent 3D in the film. Is beautifully composed and converted. This is awesome 3D. Anthony Hopkins' character lives in a cave on the side of the hill, and the view of that hill is very good, with the 3D bringing out its height nicely, and there are various views inside the cave where the 3D helps to show its space and texture. It's not super strong 3D, but it's definitely apparent, and I think it adds something to the atmosphere of this place. And it's adding to the atmosphere that the 3D often does in the film, so it's mostly not overly flashy, but it's done well with clear and realistic separation between elements. Like in crowds of people, they're all occupying their own 3D space, and as ever, it's most effective when the crowd is appearing in a more dramatic moment, so this is a great piece of 3D, with old Ray Winston menacingly marching through 3D space. There's a shot in the film that's reminiscent of Dial M for Murder, with a character desperately reaching out for help, and the 3D makes it feel like she's reaching out directly to the audience. I'm not saying it's as good as Hitchcock's moment, and it's very brief, but it's a powerful bit of 3D nonetheless. There aren't that many obvious pop-outs in the film, so if that's the type of 3D you like the most, you might find this film a bit lacking. There's the odd blast, which by their nature are extremely brief moments, so not much there to enjoy emerging from the screen in any blatant way. Like I said, the interior of the Ark has a structure that offers loads of good 3D views. There's a really nice one as the camera tracks across these rows of animal enclosures, although the smoke here, which is a necessary story point, does slightly spoil the effect, as it's not really hanging in totally convincing 3D space. The water spurts here aren't particularly distinct and separate, so this view is a little bit disappointing, but then we immediately get a very nice piece of 3D looking down on them. It always seems to be in the nature of top-down shots where 3D rarely fails to shine, and this is an excellent view. There are a few more of those in the film. Here's one of someone clinging on at height, so a bit of a classic 3D view, and it works very well here. And I think one of the best shots in the film is this one. I really love this. It's a nice top-down view, and the camera drops down through the clouds towards Noah, beneath the upper deck of his Ark, and then right down to his face. It's a really good movement of the camera through 3D space, and best of all, this is at a pivotal moment in the film. It was the flood's first raindrop that we were falling with, so it's an example of great 3D being used at a crucial moment in the film. It would be a good shot in 2D, no doubt about that, but I do think it's significantly enhanced by the 3D, and therefore the relevance of the moment is given greater power. And once the weather's kicked in, we get another view of the planet, again looking very spherical, and possibly this time a little bit comical too. We obviously see quite a bit of rain, and it's generally very well done. I wonder if maybe some of it has been digitally augmented, as it's often clearly in its own space, with noticeable separation from the background. A good moment is when we see through a curtain of rain to the shelter and warmth of the inside of the Ark beyond the rain, so great use of 3D here too. There's also another really nice high-up, top-down view of the rain, which works very well, but I don't think I've ever seen a shot like this, top-down in the rain, that comes close to the similar epic slow-motion 3D view that was achieved in Aquaman, speaking of whom, I assume his brand of Atlanteans would have sniggered at the concept of a global flood punishment. A shot that tends to always look good in 3D is when the camera is set low down and the plane of the ground stretches back into the screen, and when there's something on that plane, it can be even better. So here we have snakes on a plane, and it looks great. And the reverse view of them as they make their way onto the Ark is excellent, as the sky's full of insects too, and they look fabulous in 3D here. Where I think the 3D works best, not necessarily from a wow point of view, but from a storytelling point of view, are in the various shots of Noah as a man alone. So the composition of these shots lend themselves to let the 3D emphasise how his actions have isolated him, which is done very well amongst the various parts of the ark's structure, with the beams and walls and depth beyond them forming an empty space which Noah occupies, his solitary anguish, I think, being much more pronounced in 3D. Maybe the best 3D view of Noah on the Ark is the typically great shot of ladder climbing. It's always a winner, and the reason I think it's so good here is because the strong 3D view helps to emphasise the drama in the moment as he's climbing up with knife in hand and murder in mind. For me, a hugely disappointing bit of the 3D is the rainbow when it finally appears. Sorry if that's a spoiler. Looking flat and totally unimpressive from a stereo point of view, which again, if they'd been making this as a 3D film, I would have expected a shot of the rainbow spreading out across 3D space in a spectacular way. I've taken hyperstereo photos of rainbows, and whilst they can be seen to be sitting in a very specific 3D space in the distance, the nature of what they are means that they'll always look flat, but in a movie you can do what you want, and this really was an opportunity to make a stunning three-dimensional arch. It could have been incredible, but it ends up being very uninspiring and, frankly, a rather meagre reward for all that soggy genocide. So just a very quick word about the film itself. You don't have to be a believer to get something out of this. Well, maybe it helps if you're a believer in Darren Aronofsky as a filmmaker. I mean, it's fairly crazy, but some would say so's the source material, and the source material of the flood story as told in Genesis is quite brief. It features a 300 cubit arc, but maybe not so much as 1 cubit of character arc. So he's expanded on it in various ways, including elements of fantasy and magic and Noah's voyage of torment. The way I read the film, it even leaves it open to your own interpretation as to whether there is a creator, or if what drives Noah is purely in his mind. Anyway, I think old Russ LaRock is an excellent piece of casting here, playing an intense and scary Noah, a man on a mission driven to do what he thinks is the right thing, as he either pursues the will of the creator or descends into insanity, or maybe the conflict of a bit of both. If he's playing him as per the King James version, then he's looking pretty good for 600 years old. It's always good to see Jennifer Connelly, although if you're a fan of British children's TV of the 1970s, you might be slightly disappointed like I was that her character wasn't called Niggly Nelly. I liked the rest of the cast too, with fun work from Anthony Hopkins and Ray Winstone, and I even thought Emma Watson was quite good too. It'll have you questioning Noah's actions, and maybe more to the point, the actions of the creator, if you think there is one, who incidentally isn't named in the film. Like they say in Time Bandits, we don't know him that well. It feels very much like a post-Lord of the Rings take on the story, or perhaps more relevantly a post-The Hobbit take on it. That's in terms of expanded story for good or bad, as well as the living rock creatures, and all of that makes for some fun visuals. It's pretty much devoid of humour, and it has a heavy tone, and it's another one of those films where it felt possibly slightly surprising that it was given a 3D release. I think on films of this budget that was maybe an obvious thing to do from an accountant's point of view though, and overall I'm very glad it was given one, as the 3D here is all pretty solid, and it's occasionally excellent, and it's certainly the only reason I'd have ever bought a copy, which I'm quite glad that I did. I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.